The sound started, not as a catastrophe, but as routine. It was just another riot. I pressed my ear against the cold, thick steel of cell 47, the metal vibrating against my cheek. It had begun in D Block, a maximum security wing reserved for the true animals, or maybe just the truly unlucky. It was a deep, frustrated, bass roar, the sound of 200 men finding common cause in anger, amplified 1,000 times by the unholy acoustics of concrete, steel, and cinder block. I could hear the familiar chorus of the COs shouting into bullhorns, the dull thumps of rubber batons striking plastic shields, and the satisfying metallic clang of lockers being thrown down utility stairwells. "Just another Tuesday," Sal, the old-timer in the cell next to mine, muttered through the ventilation slot. He had seen a decade of these. They rarely lasted past the first canister of tear gas. I tried to force a laugh, but the anxiety was a knot tightening in my chest. I was only 3 years into a 6-year bid for a mistake involving a bad night and a worse choice of friends. 6 years I spent trying to be a ghost, trying to keep my head down, not get involved in anything. Riots meant lockdown, potential injury, and worse, time added. But this time, the sound was wrong. It lacked the organized cadence of protest. There was no chant, no clear objective in the noise. It was pure, uncontrolled screaming, ragged and animalistic. And then, woven through the general chaos, came that high, piercing shriek. A sound of pain that wasn't human, but of something mimicking human pain, with a dreadful, tearing quality. It made the hair stand up on my arms and the taste of bile rise in my throat. Then the silence. It hit like a solid wall, immediate, absolute. A roaring, a shouting, a clanging, gone. It left a ringing emptiness, a void broken only by a frantic, wet slapping sound coming from the front of C Block, near the main guard station. It sounded like someone dragging a heavy, saturated sack across the floor. The fluorescent lights, those harsh, sterile white lines that usually buzz relentlessly, flickered once, then dimmed, settling into a sickly yellow-gray hum under some terrible unseen strain. The prison was losing power. I looked up at the clock bolted high on the wall. 3:07 p.m. A single distinct clank echoed down the corridor, followed by the faint skittering of metal against tile. Keys. A guard had dropped his keys. The sloshing, dragging sound accelerated, growing closer, mixed now with a deep, rasping inhalation, like someone trying to breathe through a throat packed with sand and blood. Suddenly, the lock on my cell door whirred. It was a central control override. The button in control they only hit for the most extreme block-wide emergencies, usually to seal every man inside his tomb. Instead, the heavy steel door slid open with a wrenching screech of rusted rollers, revealing the corridor. I stared at the gaping black hole where my door had been. Sal? Your door open? Yeah, kid. It's open. It's a mistake. They're trying to contain D Block and they hit the C Block emergency release by accident. This cell is the safest place. Get back inside and blockade it if you can. Safest? Sal, that wasn't a riot. That was... Listen to that sound. The wet slapping was closer, almost at the block entrance. We gotta move. Now. They're coming down the block. I'm staying put, he declared, his voice firm, edged with the old-timer's contempt for panic. Been here 10 years. Every time someone breaks protocol and runs into the chaos, they end up in solitary or the infirmary. This noise will pass. I'm waiting for the sirens and the tactical unit. I looked from the dark, blood-scented corridor to Sal's closed door. The instinct to survive warred with a lifetime of conditioning to obey the rules. The roaring was almost upon us. There was no time to argue. "Suit yourself, old man," I whispered, adrenaline burning away my common sense. I was done being a ghost. I stepped out into the polished concrete floor, my knees weak, every nerve in screaming for me to retreat back into the shadow of the cell. The corridor was deserted. The air was heavy, thick with the overwhelming, cloying odor of raw meat, hot metal. It was a smell that instantly overpowered the disinfected, stale sweat that usually permeated the place. I crept forward, hugging the wall, heading toward the sound and guard station. The laminated glass of the observation booth wasn't shattered. It was imploded, punched inward, as if by a hydraulic ram, jagged shards scattered everywhere. And then I saw him. It was C.O. Reynolds, the hulking meathead who ran this block, a man whose casual cruelty was legendary. But it wasn't him. His uniform was torn to ribbons, hanging off of his frame. The flesh on his neck and face had been stripped away, raw and red, exposing bone in patches. His eyes were milky white, fixed on nothing but instinct. He was hunched over the slumped body of a maintenance worker. Poor Marty, who now lay in a pool of his own dark blood. Reynolds was tearing at him with his teeth. The slapping and sloshing sound was him feeding. The noise of my slow approach finally reached him. Reynolds lifted his head, a rope of viscera hanging from his jaw. He exposed his teeth coated in blood and let out a guttural bellow. Not a word, not pain, but a sound of pure ravenous hunger that clawed at the sanity in my mind. He locked those dead milky eyes on me. I didn't think about my 6 years. I didn't think about the rules. I thought only of survival. I didn't even drop my gaze. I simply ran. The clock above the imploded guard station read 3:08 p.m. I had been free for 60 seconds, and I was already running for my life. I sprinted down C Block. Reynolds was roaring behind me, his heavy boots slapping on the floor. He was faster than he had any right to be. I dodged a metal garbage bin and burst through the heavy double doors into the main rotunda. This was the prison's heart, a massive echoing concrete silo where all 4 cell blocks, A, B, C, and D, converged. Above, graded steel catwalks spanned the void, leading to the administration wing and central control. The rotunda floor was a slaughterhouse. It was slick, dark red, and the air was ringing with screams, both those of the terrified and those of the new predators. Guards and inmates, uniforms and jumpsuits, were locked in a horrific, churning mass. I saw a group of men trying to fend off 2 infected, broken broom handles. One of the men went down with a gurgling shriek, and the attack was immediately redirected to him. The infected didn't fight back. They just moved with a horrifying, single-minded focus. I needed a weapon. I spotted a stack of stainless steel food trays near the closed cafeteria entrance. I peeled off the heavy top tray and held it up like a flimsy metal shield. My only logical destination was the administration wing, an isolated structure that looked like a bank vault. They had to house some remaining staff, some security system that could lock down the facility or contact the outside world. I scrambled onto the metal staircase that led up to the catwalks, taking the treads 2 at a time. The ringing of my boots against the steel was agonizingly loud. Below me, 3 inmates, all infected. One wearing a ridiculous shower turban, clambered onto the bottom step, reaching upward with bloody hands. "Stay back!" I screamed, kicking wildly with my right boot. I connected hard with the first one's jaw, a solid, sickening contact that sent it tumbling backwards, taking the others down in the tangling of limbs and wet snarls. The time I gained was paid for, pure adrenaline. I reached the first floor catwalk, the graded floor shuddering slightly beneath my weight. I looked down, seeing the sea of orange and white milling below, their hunger driving them toward the scent of blood, fear. I reached the heavy, reinforced doors of the admin wing. They were sealed shut. I tried the security panel anyway, my trembling fingers hitting the keycard reader and the fingerprint scanner. Nothing. No, of course not. They required a card, a print, a guard override from inside. They were a fortress. I was on the wrong side. Useless. I flattened myself against the cold, rough concrete wall beside the door, gasping, trying to slow my heart from exploding in my chest. The catwalk was a terrible place to stop. The infected below were beginning to storm the staircase, sensing I was trapped.
"Hey, up here."
The voice was low, familiar, saved my life. I looked across the wide, dizzying chasm of the rotunda to the A-block catwalk, usually reserved for the facility's most violent cases. Standing there, holding a massive industrial fire extinguisher like a warhammer, was Marcus. Marcus. We were not friends. We had a bitter rivalry over a card game and a territorial dispute on the yard that had nearly cost me a month in solitary. But now he looked as terrified and desperate as I felt. That made him the best thing I'd seen all day. "The doors are locked. We need central control to open the main gate." I pointed up to the small, heavily shielded door high above the admin wing. Marcus shook his head violently, spraying a bit of sweat.
"Forget it. They'll be crawling with the COs in there. The moment they turn, they became the first wave. We need height. The roof. The maintenance shaft. It runs up the main chimney."
The maintenance shaft. That was the ghost route, the myth of the prison engineers. A narrow, unmarked utility corridor tucked away. It was 2 floors up, behind the laundry rooms. "Laundry is A-block!" I shouted, horrified. This meant crossing the rotunda again.
"Then come on, idiot. What else is there?"
Marcus was already running back toward his cell block, not waiting for an answer. He was right. Central control was a fortress that was probably already compromised. The roof was the only direction left to go. I swallowed a mouthful of metallic-tasting air, gripped the heavy steel tray tightly, started running back, forcing myself to look only forward. I had to jump the gap between the C-block and A-block catwalks, a terrifying 7-foot leap over certain death. I cleared it, landing hard on the graded metal, the steel tray skittering away from my grip. I didn't stop to retrieve it. I rammed through the heavy metal door into the laundry section. The atmosphere was an immediate contrast. Heavy, thick with the oppressive humidity and the cloying smell of industrial detergent. The light was better here, harsher, reflected off the rows of massive steel washers and dryers. Marcus was struggling to jam a trolley full of damp sheets against the main entrance door.
"Help me. Hurry."
I grabbed one side of a massive empty soap dispenser barrel, which smelled like cheap lemon, and shoved it against the door. The trolley held for a moment.
"Too late."
Marcus grunted, his eyes wide, pointing past me. Emerging from the vents of 3 massive, still-running tumble dryers, steam still hissing from their vents, were 3 fresh infected. They were naked, their skin blistered pink and raw from the heat, their bodies still steaming. They moved slower, confused by their ordeal, but they were no less hungry. I lunged for a 2-foot length of steel pipe lying next to an industrial washer. The pipe used for disconnecting hoses. I snatched it up. The lead zombie, its face a mask of peeled skin, lurched toward me. I swung the pipe like a bat, connecting it with the side of his jaw with a sickening, wet crunch. Its head twisted violently, but its body kept coming. These things didn't care about pain. Marcus raised the fire extinguisher.
Clear the way.
He aimed the nozzle at the second infected and pulled the trigger. A blinding cloud of pressurized chemical foam exploded outward, coating the creature instantly. It began to slip and slide on the wet concrete, sliding uncontrollably into a massive washing machine with a thud. I turned back to the first one, which was closing in. I kicked a heavy plastic laundry basket into its shins, momentarily tripping it. As it fell, I brought the pipe down with all my strength on the back of its neck, right where the spine met the skull. The force of the blow was sickening, like breaking dry firewood. It finally stopped moving.
A time, dude.
Marcus was wheezing, his face pale, slick with sweat. He kicked the pipe back to me.
Keep moving.
I glanced at the industrial clock on the laundry wall. 3:22 p.m. 13 minutes. Every minute felt like an hour. Every second was a miracle. Marcus kicked open a small, nondescript steel door behind the mountain of linen sacks. Inside was a hole, black and claustrophobic, promising. It was the maintenance shaft, with thin, rusty ladder rungs bolted onto the concrete.
Go, and I'll seal this door when you're halfway up.
Marcus pushed me into the opening. I scrambled inside, finding the rungs blindly with my feet and hands. The space was barely wide enough for me to breathe. I started climbing, the rusty metal scraping against my palms. I didn't dare look up or down, focusing only on the next rung, the next grasp of stale, dusty air. Below me, I heard the sound of the main laundry room door finally succumbing to the pressure. The metal groaned, then tore. A roar erupted as the hordes spilled into the room. I heard Marcus scrambling, trying to seal the small utility door. "Marcus, get in! Now!" I yelled, panic rising in my throat. He let out a short, terrifying, desperate roar directly below me. Not of fear, but of pure, furious exertion. Then his voice strained, breaking.
Go. I'm right behind you.
There was a massive, sickening wet thud that echoed up the concrete shaft, followed by a grunt of pain that was cut short, and then the awful, unmistakable sound of metal crushing bone. Silence. Then a quick, hungry slurping sound, starting directly below my boots and rising up the shaft. Marcus was gone. I didn't stop to mourn. The guilt was a physical weight, but the terror was stronger. I climbed faster, propelled by the crushing, absolute realization that I was utterly alone, climbing away from my only ally's final moments. My fingers scraped against a loose hatch cover, a small steel plate meant for routine chimney inspections. I shoved it open with a desperate surge of strength and tumbled out onto the flat and gravelly prison roof. The air hit me. It was cold, clean, vast. I gasped it in, tasting the smoke. Distance. I staggered to the edge of the roof. My prison facility was a sprawling block of concrete below me, surrounded by 2 towering layers of chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Below the walls, the neighboring town was engulfed in flames. Sirens wailed, then one by one cut out abruptly, swallowed by the rising static and generalized chaos. It wasn't just our prison. It was everywhere. I was free of the cell, free of the concrete maze, but I was on a flat, exposed platform, completely trapped by the wire perimeter, waiting for a rescue that would never come. I looked down at the courtyard, where the jerky, shambling figures were spilling out of A block, drawn by the sounds of the riot and the smell of blood. 15 minutes had passed since my door opened. My 6-year sentence had been commuted to a lifetime of terror. My old life was over, and a new one had begun.